Hello, everyone. I'm Dawn Duran, Acting Director of the Sex Offender Sentencing, Monitoring, Apprehending, Registering, and Tracking Office, and I welcome you to this webinar to provide guidance for the Adam-Walsh Act Implementation Grant applications. As you know, the Adam-Walsh Act is now 10 years old. Title I of the Act laid out the requirements of the Sex Offender Registration and Notification Act, or SORNA. We now have 17 implemented states, 3 territories, and over 100 tribes, with most of the rest of the jurisdictions actively working towards implementation. So there is a shift from implementing SORNA to maintaining SORNA requirements and best practices, as well as incorporating newer requirements such as the 21-day international travel notice that the passage of International Megan's Law codified. We hope jurisdictions will use these funds to increase and improve the maintenance and sustainability of your programs, as well as training and support of local and regional and tribal efforts within your jurisdictions. Training those within your state, territory, or tribe is vital to information sharing and continued success of your sex offender registration and notification system. At this time, I will turn the webinar over to Amy Staubs, Grants Management Specialist, and Stephanie Carrig, Senior Policy Advisor, for specific guidance on the FY17 Adam-Walsh Act Implementation Grant Program.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Carrig. I am a Senior Policy Advisor at the Office of Sex Offender Sentencing, Monitoring, Apprehending, Registering, and Tracking, otherwise known as the SMART Office.
And hello, I'm Amy Staubs, Grants Management Specialist with the SMART Office.
In this webinar, we will address the requirements of the Adam-Walsh Act, or AWA, particularly Title I of the Adam-Walsh Act, which is the Sex Offender Registration and Notification Act, or SORNA. We will discuss eligibility to apply for the AWA Implementation Grant. We will provide information about the award and its timeline, and about the goals, objectives, and deliverables of the Adam-Walsh Act Implementation Grant Program. We will also discuss the process of preparing an application for the grant. The SMART Office, through the AWA Implementation Grant and other activities, assists jurisdictions with developing and enhancing programs designed to implement the requirements of SORNA. SORNA sets forth a comprehensive set of standards for the registration and notification of convicted sex offenders. SORNA revised prior federal laws on sex offender registration and notification and, in so doing, closed gaps and loopholes that existed under those laws. Under SORNA, jurisdictions are required to maintain a sex offender registration and notification system that captures each registrable offender who resides, works, or attends school in the jurisdiction. SORNA went beyond prior federal laws by expanding the number of sex offenses that must be captured by registration jurisdictions. And perhaps most importantly, SORNA expanded the definition of jurisdiction to include 212 federally recognized Indian tribes, of whom 197 have elected to stand up their own registration and notification systems.
Thanks, Steph. Eligibility for this AWA solicitation includes states, the District of Columbia, principal U.S. territories, and federally recognized tribal governments that are eligible under SORNA Section 127 to carry out the function of SORNA and have elected to do so. See page 1 of the solicitation for eligibility information. Jurisdictions that have not previously received funding under this program are strongly encouraged to apply. Jurisdictions can apply up to $400,000. The period of performance is up to 24 months, starting on or after October 1, 2017. Awardees can expect to be notified of their AWA award by September 30th, 2017. 30% of the total SORNA awards for this year are set aside for tribal jurisdictions. See the slide for the application due date. The AWA grant program goals, objectives, and deliverables include assisting jurisdictions to achieve substantial implementation of SORNA, to maintain and enhance their SORNA implementation, and to plan for the sustainability of SORNA in their jurisdiction.
Thanks, Amy. The SORNA activities and strategies that the AWA grant could be used to develop or enhance are the items listed on this slide. I just want to note the last 2 items on this list. The use of AWA grant funds to support innovative registration and notification practices, as well as the use of funds to support jurisdiction-wide trainings on SORNA-compliant registration and notification practices. If you have any questions about possible strategies and activities during the application process, please contact our office. For states that have SORNA tribal jurisdictions, the state may apply for funding to enhance their collaboration with those jurisdictions. For example, the state may apply to support its efforts to provide the tribes with access to NCIC NSOR. In addition, to the extent that the state is carrying out the registration and notification functions for a tribe, regardless of whether that tribe is a SORNA tribal jurisdiction, the state may apply for funding to support those activities. An application to fund a collaborative approach or project must include supporting documentation, such as an interagency agreement, a memorandum of understanding, or a letter of cooperation that demonstrates the collaborative endeavor from each member SORNA jurisdiction involved in the collaboration. Likewise, to the extent that the state is carrying out the registration and notification functions for a tribe, the state should include a letter of support or cooperation and/or a memoranda of understanding that indicates that the local jurisdiction or tribe is in agreement with and supportive of the proposed activities.
Changes you'll see in the FY 2017 solicitation include, for all applicants, the ability to include safety training for law enforcement and other criminal justice agency personnel that are responsible for sex offender registration activities. You'll see that on page 5 of the solicitation. And for tribes, you'll see clarification on community education programs. These are supported as they relate to sex offender topics, as you'll see there. So now we'll turn to preparing your application package, which includes the project narrative, budget detail, and budget narrative, as well as the required attachments. We'll talk about what to include in each of these sections, as well as how those pieces are weighted in the peer review scoring process. First, we'll talk about the project narrative that begins with the statement of the problem or need within your jurisdiction. In this section, please be clear to describe the jurisdiction's status as it relates to substantial implementation of SORNA. Remember, the audience of your application is not just the SMART office, but peer reviewers who are not familiar with your jurisdiction, its work in SORNA. Be sure to support your application with relevant data on the number of sex offenders within your jurisdiction. This section is worth 10% of the total score, and remember, our peer reviewers can only score your application based on the information that you provide within the application. The next section is the project design and implementation plan. Now this is really an important section in terms of it being worth 45% of the overall peer review score. So this is where the bulk of your information is shared about your plans if funding is awarded. Please be sure to talk about your proposed activities and whether or not those are in direct response to the recommendations in your official substantial implementation report. All applicants should link their proposed activities to those that are identified in your most recent SORNA substantial implementation report. Applicants that have not yet substantially implemented must explain how the proposed project activities bring the jurisdiction closer to implementation and provide that information about your jurisdiction's SORNA implementation timeline and activities. All applicants must clearly state the goals and objectives for your project. Please be specific and measurable and realistic in those objectives. The next section of the project narrative is the capabilities and competency statement. This is worth 20% of the overall score. Be sure to describe your management structure, the roles and responsibilities of each of the key personnel within your program, and attach those position descriptions or resumes. Those are important pieces for our peer reviewers to consider. Also discuss the relationship with the sex offender registration offices within your jurisdiction. The strongest applications that we receive thoroughly discuss that relationship with the SORs within and outside of your jurisdiction. The next section is related to the collection of required data. That is worth 10% of the overall score. Just speak to your plans to make sure you are collecting the minimum data that is required by the SMART office as indicated in the solicitation. Other required items points to the attachments that you'll receive. You receive 5 points just for the submission of those materials, so it is important to make sure that you include that information as well. That includes the project abstract, a timeline, and those position descriptions and resumes. If applicable, include memorandums of understanding, tribal resolutions, and indirect cost rate agreements. Okay, next we'll turn to the budget detail worksheet and narrative, which is worth 10% of your overall score in the application. For the AWA award, no match is required at the local level. Your budget should correspond with your proposed goals, objectives, and deliverables, and align with the Office of Justice Programs budget categories, which are identified in the sample detail worksheet, which you'll see a link to on page 19 of the solicitation. Your budget should maximize cost effectiveness of the grant expenditures and be reasonable and necessary based on what you've described as your need and the activities that you have defined within your application. For those that are including indirect costs, please be sure to include a current year indirect cost rate agreement for the award period. Remember, the award period will begin October 1, 2017 or later. If you don't yet have an approved IDC rate for after October 1, that can be used for budgeting purposes, but know that you will need to submit a new signed agreement via grant adjustment notice when a new rate is received. Last but not least, in your application package, the attachments. Please be sure to clearly label all of these attachments because there are quite a few, and it makes it easier for both the SMART office and our peer reviewers to locate these materials and evaluate them when we can clearly identify what those are. These will include your position descriptions and resumes for your key personnel, a timeline, disclosure of lobbying activities, disclosure of pending applications. This is an increasingly important attachment to include because in fiscal year 16, we began to place a hold on funds. So you were not able to obligate or expend funds until that disclosure of pending applications was received. So please make sure that that is included at the time you submit your application. Additional attachments include the standard form 424, which is the application. This must be signed by the agency's authorized representative. Please make sure this is not the same person you're listing as the point of contact for your award. The authorized representative must be the individual who has the authority to sign contracts with the federal government. If that individual is not correctly identified in your application form, that will delay processing of an award should you be selected to be awarded. There's also a number of other attachments that are included here on the list. Again, remember and use the checklist that's at the bottom, the back pages of the solicitation to make sure all of the required attachments are included. Items that are not included will delay processing and potentially delay your access to the award funds after the award date. So we wanted to be able to cover in advance some of the generally allowable activities and costs that we typically see under the AWA award. These will include personnel, a number of positions and professional services that you may integrate into your project plan to support SORNA implementation activities. And that would also include fringe. Equipment is a standard item that we see, and we've listed for you a number of the items that are generally allowable, again, when you demonstrate the need within your jurisdiction. Remember that our OJP financial guide provides some specific guidance to you as to what is seen as equipment versus supplies. That generally relates to the cost of the per unit item and the life expectancy for those items. All of that information you can find again within the OJP financial guide. Travel is also an allowable expense for you to include within your budget. This would include attending related SORNA-related training seminars, conferences, technical assistance meetings, and for travel throughout your jurisdiction in order to maintain relationships and to organize SORNA working group meetings. You can include mileage to perform a number of duties that are related to SORNA. Just please remember that mileage is an allowable expense. Fuel costs are not allowable unless it's related to a pre-approved rental car. Mileage would be covering both your gasoline, as well as wear and tear on a vehicle that's allowed under the program. As always, all proposed travel costs must align with GSA travel guidelines. Also remember that rental cars are allowable. You can include those in your projected budget, but please remember that you must have prior approval from a SMART grant manager for every instance of using a rental car. Use of consultants, contracts, and subawards are also allowed under this award. This can include a variety of professional services that you may need to support your efforts, which may include technology professionals, attorneys, compliance specialists. Just be sure to note that any consulting activities do not duplicate services already available from SMART-funded training and technical assistance providers. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those resources that are available later in the webinar. Your agency must use established guidelines for competitive procurement processes, for selecting bids. And please note that if you are identifying any sole source vendors in your application for agreements that would be in excess of $150,000, you will be required to include information about justifying that sole source vendor with your application. Also remember that when integrating consultants into your application, OJP has a maximum daily consulting rate of $650 per day based on experience. Any proposed consultant that has a rate higher than that $650 a day would require additional documentation and justification that is required at the time of your application. Some other allowable costs that you may incorporate into your grant application include rental space, software, upgrades, licenses, or subscriptions, internet access and telephone services, as well as officer identification and visibility materials. Vehicle leases are also allowable, just with justification and a cost analysis of that lease versus purchase cost efficiency information. And for tribes that are participating in the TAP program or other jurisdictions seeking to meet specific quality requirements or optimized backgrounds for offender photographs, expenses that would help with this, including specific paints or lighting, are considered allowable costs that you can include in your grant application. There are some unallowable activities that we encourage you to not include in your application. If they are included, you will be asked to remove those before any award would move forward. These include construction, any use of food or beverage, gift cards and prepaid phone cards are also considered unallowable, as well as stipends. And as I noted earlier, gasoline or fuel and vehicle repairs are not allowable expense. Only mileage reimbursement is allowable. And of course, vehicle insurance is not an allowable activity or cost. So how to apply? You'll apply for this grant opportunity within grants.gov, and we've listed the funding opportunity there on the screen for you, as well as the due date. Applicants must register with grants.gov prior to submitting an application. Please do this in advance. If there's any problem with your registration, it can delay your ability to upload your grant package. OJP also recommends that you submit your entire grant application package within 72 hours prior to the due date, just to ensure that you have time to receive any of the notifications if there was a problem with any of your materials.
Here is a list of resources and tools that are available to all registration jurisdictions. SMART.gov is the SMART Office's official website and includes several tools to assist jurisdictions in their efforts to implement Sorna, including a checklist and the other items listed here. The Drew Shadeen National Sex Offender Public Website, or nsopw.gov, is a public website that enables the public to simultaneously search all registration jurisdictions' public registry websites. The Sorna Exchange Portal is a web-based tool that the SMART Office created. The portal facilitates various communications between registration jurisdictions, most notably notifications between jurisdictions regarding sex offender relocation. The Sex Offender Management, Assessment, and Planning Initiative, or SOMAPI, is a large-scale project designed to assess the state of research and practice in sex offender management. The materials that have been generated by this project are available on our website. Finally, the Sex Offender Registry Tool, or SORT, provides local registration agencies with their own specialized public sex offender registry websites and can function as the state-level administrative registry system. There are also many resources and tools that our office has designed specifically for the tribal jurisdictions. The Tribal and Territory Sex Offender Registry System, or TSORS, is the tribal counterpart to SORT, functioning as the jurisdiction-level registry system. It also includes a customizable public website. The Tribal Access Program is a Department of Justice program that supports tribes in analyzing their needs for national crime information, and it helps to provide appropriate solutions, including a biometric biographic computer workstation with capabilities to process finger and palm prints, taking mugshots, and submitting records to national databases, and accessing CJIS systems such as NSOR for criminal and civil purposes. The Native American Sex Offender Management Project, or NASOM, seeks to identify and develop existing resources for the treatment, management, and reentry of American Indian and Alaska Native adult and juvenile sex offenders who are returning to tribal lands. The Model Tribal Code assists tribes in developing or updating existing sex offender registration legislation to meet SORNA requirements. The Guide on SORNA Implementation in Indian Country provides registry personnel with information needed to assist in efforts towards implementing SORNA. Lastly, SORNA Tribal Training and Technical Assistance is also available to assist tribes in these efforts. If you have any questions, please contact us at the information provided.